Recording. Okay. Hello there. My name is Jonathan Pinton, and I'm one of the hosts of Lit Balm. Normally at the start of the show, I go ahead and read a poem, but today we're going to turn it right over to my co-host, Mark Vincennes. Let me tell you a little bit about Mark. Mark Vincennes is an Anglo-Swiss poet, a fiction writer, translator, editor, publisher, designer, multi-genre artist, and musician. He has published 14 books of poetry, including more recently Becoming the Sound of Bees, Leaning into the Infinite, The Syndicate of Water and Light, and Here Comes the Night Dust. Mark's newest collection, The Little Book of Earthly Desires, and a novella set in ancient China, Three Taoes of Tao, or How to Catch a Fortuitous Elephant, are both forthcoming in 2021 from Spleight and Dival. An album of music, ambience, and verse, Left Hand Clapping, is also forthcoming from Tree Torn Records. Mark's also a prolific translator and has translated from the German, Romanian, and French. He has published 10 books of translation, most recently Unexpected Development by award-winning Swiss poet and novelist Klaus Merz, which was a finalist for the 2016 Cliff Becker Book Prize in Translation. Mark's poems have been published in many journals, including The Nation, Plowshares, the Los Angeles Review, World Literature Today, Rarian, and Plume. His work has received fellowships and grants from the Swiss Arts Council, the National Endowments for the Arts, and the Winter Binner Foundation for Poetry. He's the editor and publisher of Mad Hat Press and the publisher of New American Writing. He's lived all over the world, from Brazil to China to Iceland to India. He was born on the Peak in Hong Kong, but now lives on a farm in rural Western Massachusetts, where there are more coyotes and bears than people. Mark, will you read a poem for us today?
Yes. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm actually going to read two short ones. Both these poems come from a new book that I've been working on called Drunk on Stars. And this poem's called Outside of the 10, I Owe You. What's my rank and file, you ask? I heave sacks onto crates and cranes, I said. Naturally, my mind wanted to chime in, so I actually said, you'll never be missing me. And you, in your sly way, one eyebrow arched like Spock, drew the wind across your eye. Did you see the green flags on the hill? Those are all just trees, you said mockingly. Then, which part of the code don't you get, she said. Just wait, I said, haltingly. Outside of the 10 I owe you, there's still the matter of the cat, and the crate, and that weird wedding bed. And this one's called Subliminal Message. The left hand turns the key, unattached, artlessly. The other sits in the pocket, rubbing coins. Behind, the universe was streaming in, unimpeded by all that matter. The mice were playing in the larder, the cat sniffing something on the breeze. Multiple moons cast their wary glances. Autumn fields were ripe in berries. The bear ambled along, as was his lot on a Thursday night. Each instant was a reality for him, each past nothing more than a dream. Mostly it was the shrill sound of the gray tree frog that stirred him. Oh, but nothing could keep him from the garbage, the nappies, a little leftover mac and cheese, and all the plastics in their glossy luxury. Once the corn was reaped and the fields were bare, an unbearable lightness rises from those left, as if a frozen shadow swept across the earth, and all that was left to do was sleep. Thank you, thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our feature tonight, which includes Steven Cramer, Joyce Pessaroff, Gail Mazer, and Enzo Silon Surin. And we'll start off with Steven. Steven is the author of 6 poetry collections, most recently Listen, which just came out with Mad Hat Press. There was a great review in the Boston Globe just the other day. His 4th collection, Goodbye to the Orchard, won the Sheila Motten Prize from the New England Poetry Club. and was a 2005 Massachusetts Honor Book, recipient of fellowships from the Massachusetts Cultural Council and the National Endowment for the Arts. He founded and now teaches in the low residency MFA program in creative writing at Lesley University. Welcome, Steven.
Thank you, Mark. And I want to say a second thank you, Mark, for maybe even a third, but at least a second thank you for having the four of us read together, and also for the care that you take with every book you publish, the way it looks. I sent a copy to a friend, and he just said, both inside and outside. He didn't mean he liked the poems necessarily, but he just said inside and outside it was beautiful. And I really am very grateful to you for that. I'm going to sort of take a risk here, and I'm going to there are about 7 or 8, and I'm not going to read them all, poems that since Lowell did it, we call them imitations. Poems that are modeled on work by other poets, usually in another language. And the risk here is that the host and publisher of Mad Hat Press speaks 10 languages. So there's a good chance that Mark will know the original language that these imitations imitate from. Well, actually they don't, because what I tend to do when I do an imitation is I find translations that I really think are bad. But I have this instinct that the poem in the original language deserves better. It's a little bit hubristic, I admit it. And so then I work on a version that I think is a poem that stands on its own, but still owes something to someone else. So I'm putting on a mask in a way for all the poems I'm gonna read. The first one is called, very straightforwardly, after Tomas Solomon, who was a Slovenian poet who we lost in 2014. What I find interesting about him in particular is that he was very influential to many poets roughly my age, but he was also very deeply influenced by American poets, O'Hara, Ashbery, and others, and was astoundingly prolific. This is not based on any particular poem. I was reading a lot of Solomon, and he sort of got under my skin. After Tomas Solomon. Before I died, I could hear singing from under the ash heaps. Motor oil dripped, a rosary on the blacktops. I rose with vapor from August dew. I dueled with oak branches. I walked through my smoldering city, whistling. Not one cloud, but you couldn't see the sun. Keep going, I thought. You can sleep under trestles and loot as you wish. Heat exhaled through cracks in the sidewalks. Red ants stormed an apricot pit. I stole an extra pair of socks off a dead man. Birds behaved like birds. That is, like the reptiles from which they're descended. Flashlights burned white, then amber, then not at all. I carried somebody's mother on my back. We sank into mud up to my knees, my thighs, my waist, while God called out, "Get over here and write this minute." I think you don't have to ask, "Can you hear me?" in Zoom readings. In fact, maybe you have to ask, "Am I too loud?" Which, of course, if I am, you can.
You're at a great volume.
Hmm?
You're at a great volume.
Thank you. This next poem is in 3 parts. It's called 3 Versions of Mandelstam. One is Mandelstam was a Russian poet who was hounded to death by Stalin. These three poems, one is very early. One is sort of nicknamed the Stalin Epigram. It's the one that got him into trouble. As my understanding is that it was probably heard by an informer at a private reading that Mandelstam gave. And the last one is a later poem from 1937, where he was exiled in Russia, Voronezh. I don't remember when this happened, but after I had sort of worked on these, I put them together and felt that they created a kind of interior biography, from a kind of metaphysical innocence at the beginning through a tipping point, and then a very different tone in the third section. Three versions of Mandelstam, 1909. What should I do with this body? I'm it. Am I still there? Just want to make sure. Something just came up on the.
You're still here.
Okay, I'll start again. Three versions of Mandelstam, 1909. What should I do with this body? I'm it, and it's me. Who do I thank for the quiet luck of breath, for being alive? Please tell me. I'm very good at gardening and flowering. I'm my own companion in the world solitary. Breathing on the window of infinity, I can see a pattern in the warm haze left on the glass, a sign I hadn't recognized till now. It condenses, gone. But the design I love can't be effaced. That stays. 1933. We live numb to the homeland under our feet. Get too close, our whispers disperse to mist. But anywhere you stop to talk, the talk gravitates toward the Kremlin mountaineer. Fingers fat as earthworms, his thumbs slugs, his every word a gram, a pound, a ton. Laughter wets his roach brown upper lip. It glitters, spit and polish, like his boots. His thuggish chicken men encircle him. One by one, as he dandles them, they croon and simper or meow, Siberian cats. But only he is allowed to bellow out sentence after sentence, like horseshoes flung at the groin, brain, forehead, eyes. A firing squad floods his mouth with sweet relish, his chest warm as a hug from home. And the third part is Voronezh, 1937. I'm still not dead. I have company in a woman wearing the sort of rags I wear. Across the tundra, bliss still reaches me through fog and squalling snow and hunger. My poverty's a miracle. What I lack, a type of wealth. Alone, heartened, at peace, I kneel to the night and to the day. Work that sings from a full throat must be blameless. The sad man runs from snarling dogs on a shadow's orders into the wind's edge. The poor man, waking from a coma, begs his shadow. Can you spare some change? My understanding is that that image of the shadow was Mandelstam's encoded image for Stalin as well. Okay, these are, I'm going to read one of two poems after I wrote, after I published Clangings, which is in the voice of someone who is undergoing schizophrenia. I sort of needed a transitional object, and the microscripts of Robert Walzer, who was also diagnosed with schizophrenia, became my transitional object. I was reading them and I found myself responding to them and adapting some of them. Robert Walzer's microscripts, he wrote, people don't really know exactly when he started writing these tiny stories, fables, but they were in scripts so small that people who found them after his death thought they were in code, not actually in German. And the German he used, I forget the name of it now, but it wasn't Latinate German. It was German that derived from the Middle Ages. And Mark, you probably
wasn't it Swiss German?
You know, I was just looking at, but it was not contemporary German.
Yeah, so Swiss German and High German, so to speak.
You would know better than I would. What I found particularly interesting about them is that at first they were completely opaque. Nobody knew that they were in fact language. When they were finally decoded and translated, they produced remarkably irrational, transgressive. They are stories that can't tell a story. And that's part of what's interesting about them, I think. And they also can be very, not, they're transgressive, and they really don't, their ethical principles are, let's just say, not entirely woke. I'm just going to read one. I worked on about, I don't know, 10 of them and then just kept 2. This one's called Drink. Drunk, I read a story about a drunk. A meadow in the story, and birds singing. Give the man the shakes. He starts lying on the couch his father passed out on, staring at a painting of a meadow his mother ripped from an art book. The artist had a knack for daffodils, so his wife made arrangements of narcissus, from the Latin for numbness or stupor, till trumpets blared at him from every nook. By then, he'd painted the wife next door. I've made it, he thought. I'm all serenity, and began the work of his sober period. In those days, I was a high school student. Even during gym, my best friend drank. To get ripped means you're working on your 6-pack, he broadcast to anyone. His mother felt a chill, took to bed with a brandy before she disappeared. You could say she'd been a meadow once. Does amber bourbon in a Technicolor 50s movie thrill you the way it thrills me? In 30s black and white, rye looks like tea. A moralist, famous for condemning drink, once spoke in a speakeasy with such fire he lit a book of matches with his breath. His fiancée, who worshipped him, burst in. You're drunk, she snarled. A comment on the obvious that brought a smile even to her lips. Tough smile to forget. She ran into the street is how this story ends. rain performing a pizzicato on tree limbs and smacking her face. Out of the night, a doorway appears into which she vanishes. Leave her there. Let's drink to her health. Obviously, the Technicolor movie is an entirely anachronistic liberty I took with them. I took many liberties with these poems. All right, I'm just going to read. I'm just going to read one more. This poem ends the book. Again, it's modeled on what's probably the best known poem by the poet Ingeborg Bachmann, the late German poet Ingeborg Bachmann. It's called Bohemia Lies by the Sea. And of course, Bohemia doesn't lie by the sea except in The Winter's Tale. Among the many liberties I took with this imitation, I added an epigraph that Bachmann does not include in her poem from The Winter's Tale. And that is, thou art perfect then, our ship hath touched upon the deserts of Bohemia. Bohemia lies by the sea. If the houses here are green, I'll step into a house. If the bridges can't hold up, I'll walk on firm ground. If every age loses its labors of love, I give up mine here. If I'm not the one, someone is, and worth what I'm worth. If a word limits me now, let it limit me then. If Bohemia lies by the sea, I'll believe in the sea. And if I believe in the sea, I can hope to see land. If I am the one, anyone is, and worth what I'm worth. I don't want anything else. Let me go underground, meaning under the sea, to rediscover Bohemia. I'll wake up making peace with what I've ruined. From the bottom is where I'll know I'm not lost. Come here, you Bohemians, sailors, harborside whores, ships adrift, all you Illyrians, Venetians, and Veronese. Don't you want to be Bohemians? Don't you want to play in the comedies that have us weeping laughter? Don't you want to go wrong 100 times, as I went wrong and couldn't withstand the trials? In time, I withstood them, as Bohemia one fine day withstood them, was pardoned, and now lies by water. I'm still on the edge of a word and another country. More and more, I'm on the edge of everything. I'm a citizen of Bohemia, an itinerant actor, holding and held by nothing, allowed only to watch the shore of my choice from the questionable sea. That's it, thanks.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks.
From the questionable sea. Next up, we have Joyce Pessaroff, whose Petition is her sixth book of poems. She's the editor of Robert Bly, When Sleep is Awake, The Ploughshares Poetry Reader, and Simply Lasting, Writers on Jane Kenyon. Her fifth collection, Know Thyself, was designated a must-read by the 2016 Massachusetts Book Award. Recent poems and reviews appear in Consequence, On the Seawall, Massachusetts Review and Plume. She directed and taught at UMass's Boston MFA program in its first 4 years. Currently, she blogs for her website, So I Gave You Quartz, and you can find her on www.joycepessaroff.com and writes the poetry column for Arrowsmith Press. Welcome, Joyce.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Mark, and thank you, Mark and Jonathan, for having me read here tonight. And it's such a pleasure to read with a group of extraordinary poets who are friends and also people I've admired for many years. I'm going to begin with the title poem of my new book, Petition. I don't think there's anything I need to explain in this particular poem. Petition. Give the wealth back to those we stole it from. Give the land back to those we stole it from. Give our shotguns to those we took the land from. Maybe they'll split the barrels into irrigation pipes. Maybe they'll mill the stocks for bookends, for the books by those we took language from. Give love back to those we banished from our love. Give life back to all who lost insurance for their meds. Give medicine back to those who find it in a tea, a weed, a willow, the heat and light in hands needing a muscle. Give muscle to the tongue's backtalk, curses, and its sweetest nothings, the lay of a ripe peach. Give ripeness to a time. Give us time to restore the forests and the sea we filtered of whales, codfish, and pink dolphins. Give us eternity again. We'll set things right. This next poem, I want to thank Steven Cramer for reading the Stalin Epigram, because this poem begins with an allusion to that when Mandelstam is exiled because of that particular poem being revealed by an informer. It's written about leaving Florida for Massachusetts. I spend the winter in Florida and come back here for the good weather, for an endless summer. And this is about getting ready and preparing to leave the Gulf Coast. Egg. Who imagines the future as it will happen? Did Mandelstam think he'd die for comparing Stalin's fingers to grubs? The night of his arrest, his wife invited Akhmatova for dinner and boiled her an egg. A fresh egg was a rare thing. Before the secret police took him, Mandelstam ate the egg Akhmatova offered with salt. I clean the refrigerator before leaving the place I've lived for 6 months. There's a carton with one egg left. The look of hibiscus beguiled me, and jasmine perfume for half a year. I cared for now, forget the future. Now, what should I do with this egg? Not enough for a meal, stale, maybe good for a batch of pancakes. My mother said wasting food is a sin. There are people on this planet, thousands, who die for an egg. Though at my age it won't, I assume the future will be like now. My friends would laugh if I gave them a single egg. Would my mother laugh, or her mother, widowed with 3 children? I dropped the egg. The disposal grinds it to a slurry that will be flushed and purified, mingled with the river and salting the sea. This is my lyric for failing to find one of the homeless vets camped by the river and giving him the egg. I kayaked once past a tent patched with a blue tarp, and Jeff, curious, wanted to paddle ashore. I could barely find breath to say no. So profound was the privacy of a sandy crescent between mangroves. A tent, a hibachi, a folding chair, a styrofoam cooler. Who could have dreamed this future? And an egg. What could one egg do to redeem it? My parents retired and moved to Florida and lived in Delray Beach and died there and are buried there. And I would drive across the peninsula from the Gulf Coast to the East Coast to visit my parents' grave once a year. And I'd also visit my aunt, who is still living at 91. And she would insist on driving me to the cemetery. And this is called Visiting My Parents' Grave. I know they're not here, but they chose this place as they did their condo. And how wrong not to visit, as I did the white leather sectional and plasma TV they denied themselves until years understood to be their last. Pink marble lies flush with spikes of Bermuda grass, so the mower will find no impediment. And there's no leaving the traditional pebble beside the epitaph my mother inscribed for them both, forever in our hearts. Another mourner's tree has leapt from the ground to shade her words, and many plots behind them fill. Each time I need a map to the narrow, perpetually cared for ground. My Aunt Rita, who drove, leaves me alone for 5 minutes to, what, pray? I let her throttle past the gates of eternal light, clutching my seatbelt as she cuts across lanes of traffic. She can't get out of the cemetery fast enough. I used to do an exercise, a kind of aerobic dance exercise called NIA, which is also supposed to train your brain to be alert to separating the left and right side of the body and getting you to move different parts of your body separately and in some kind of harmony, which was very difficult for me to master. This is a poem about that exercise class, and it's called Ending with the Corpse Pose, which is a pose from yoga in which you lie down and empty your mind. Ending with the corpse pose. I flip my hands around, step left, a quarter turn, spine narrow and tall, inflexible as a ship's mast. Music surges in a wave. Shake your booty. The others pitch and roll like mermaids. Move in 4 directions. Leg up, arms down, forward, right, which I can't tell from left without a moment's thought. All meant to stimulate the old nervous system. And we're old, that junk in the trunk packed like our basements. Soon we'll shake, 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 stem to stern, in a perfect storm of illness and chemo brain. We'll swivel our hips past towers of newspaper, aisles between shaped by our bent shoulders. Roll them forward, back, point and flex. Stretch, breathe, lie down in what yoga calls the corpse pose. After dancing like a water spout as you did at 16, tipsy on wine coolers, be the flood tide before a full moon. It's the moon you want, after all. I'm going to read two more poems. This one is about another moon. It's a moon of Saturn called Enceladus, and all of the information here, almost all of the language I took from an article on Science Daily. So I'm trying to be accurate here. Life on Enceladus. It's snowing all the time at the south pole of Enceladus, which is a moon of Saturn with the loveliest name and the brightest object in the solar system, reflecting 98% of the sun's light. Its surface like the best powder day. So cold, no life could multiply, except the orbit of Enceladus around Saturn is elliptical and squeezes the moon's interior to liquid, and also what's frozen underneath the white mantle. So now and then a geyser of salt water sprays upward, and perhaps growing in the water, a litter of microbes, as yet undiscovered, but possible. Its alien DNA unsullied because capped beneath ice, and acres of snow deeper than Everest is high, and Enceladus like the white canvas of eternity, stroked by a brush with a single hair. And the last poem I'm going to read is called A Pair of Limmer Boots. I was mentioning to Mark just before the reading that we've just sold a farmhouse in Maine that we owned for 30 years and spent an awful lot of time clearing it out. And this is about clearing things out from your life when your life changes. Limmer Company makes custom hiking boots, and they still do. They're in Intervale, New Hampshire. And what you do is they don't ask for your size or anything like that. They just ask you to trace your foot and send tracings of each foot to them in order for them to create the last for your boot. A pair of Limmer boots. The life that required custom leather hiking boots is gone, and woolen cross-country knickers with knee-high socks. Clothes that used to fit for things we no longer do. I bagged them for goodwill, but you hid them with books on beekeeping, a boat hook, and ham radio. Not ready to admit that choice is narrow, that we can't recalculate our turns through the world's dark wood. You'd sent the shop in Intervale a tracing of each foot the year before they stopped taking orders. That night you crept down the cog railway's trestle, the great gulf of Mount Washington behind you. Stars bright enough to glint from your little metal lace hooks. What on that hike split before from after, like maternity smocks and baby clothes, or the mirrored dress I wore when we first met? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joyce. Fantastic. And next we have Gail Mazer, who's the author of 8 collections of poems, most recently Land's End, new and selected poems from in this year from University of Chicago Press. And they can't take that away from me. From 2001, was a finalist for the National Book Award. And Zeppo's First Wife, new and selected poems, 2005, won the Mass Book Award. Gail is the founder of the Blacksmith House Poetry Reading Series in Cambridge and has taught widely, most recently in the graduate writing programs of Boston University and Emerson College. Welcome, Gail.
Thank you. What a treat to read with these wonderful poets. I'm going to read in a sort of chronological order, which I haven't done before with this collected. And I'll start with a poem called Young Apple Tree. Young apple tree, December. What you want for it, what you'd want for a child, that she take hold, that her roots find home in stony winter soil, that she takes seasons in stride, seasons that shape and reshape her, that like a dancer's, her limbs grow pliant, graceful, and surprising, that she know in her branchings to seek balance, that she know when to flower, when to wait for the returns, that she turn to a grieving sun, to a giving sun. I just turned to a Freudian slip, that she turn to a giving sun, that she know to share fruit as it ripens, that what's lost to her will be replaced, that early summer afternoons of full blossoming tree, she casts lazy shadows, that change not frighten her, rather change meet her embrace, that remembering her small history, she find her place in an orchard, that she be her own orchard, that she outlast you, that she prepare for the hungry world, the fallen world, the loony world, something shapely, useful, new, delicious. The next poem I'm going to read is called Figures in a Landscape, which is the title of one of my books. Am I on the screen? Because I see Mark, not me.
You are. It never shows yourself in the big window.
Oh, okay. I can't read my own lips. And this was written in 2009, a few months before my husband died. Figures in a Landscape. We were two figures in a landscape in the middle distance in summer. In the foreground, twisty olive trees. A mild wind made the little dry leaves tremble. Then, of course, the horizon, the radiant blue sky. The maker was hungry for light. Light silvered the leaves, a stream. I like to think for your sake, the scene was Italian, 17th century. Viewed from here, we resembled one another, though in truth, we were unalike. And we were tiny. He'd kept us small, so the painting would be landscape, not anecdote. We were made things, deftly assembled, but beginning to show where, you muscular, sculptural, and I was I. We were different. We had a story. On good days, we found comedy in that, pratfalls, and also great sadness. Sun moved across the sky and lowered until you, then I were in shadow, bereft. The Renaissance had ended. We'd long known we were mortal. In shadow, I held the wild daisies and cosmos we'd been gathering for the table. Then the sky behind us pinked and inflamed the landscape where we were left to our own reinvention. Two silhouettes who still had places they meant to travel, who were not abstractions. Had you pricked them, they'd have bled, alizarin crimson. I wanted to walk by myself a while, but I've always been afraid to lose you. And the naked olive trees were hovering as if to surround you. That was the problem. I craved loneliness. I needed the warmth of love. If no one looks at us, do we or don't we disappear? The landscape would survive without us. When you're in it, it's not landscape any more than the horizon's a line you can stand on. I grew up in this area. I may be the only one on the screen here who did. I actually grew up on the Charles River. My father once told me that on the eve of Yom Kippur, they would go down to the Charles. He grew up in Dorchester, and empty their pockets of really mostly lint, but supposedly, giving up what they had, lint and pennies, to the Charles River. Because you flowed through my childhood, because summers I swam freely in your currents, because you froze every winter, metamorphosed to a glazed floor for skating, because I believed you were the first landing place for Leif Erikson, although the World Book claimed otherwise. Leif named his new discovery Woodland and Land of Flat Stones. Because you had trees and many flat stones, gray skipping stones. Leif's men found wild grapes and salmon there, and my father fished from your shore, catching perch and pickerel, and found them delicious to fry in spite of their little bones. Because on the Day of Atonement, my grandfather walked from Dorchester to empty his pockets into you, casting off lint and crumbs for the year's sins, his good shoes steeped in your waters. Because your dark green trees promised to protect us, because twice I nearly drowned in you, and a neighbor child did drown, small body washed up on your snarled bank. Because my love and I canoed through your toxic ears when you'd become reeking and filthy, only mutant fish and water rats swam in you. He'd say, there's no great city without a river, and because a governor determined you were worth saving and cleaned you up and made you swimmable again and lively with mallards, grackles, American coots, in our warming world, nearly paradisial, because an ocean says eternity and a river says home. Because, dear familiar, I believe I haven't stepped into the same river twice, for other rivers always flow into you, and I am always a different person. Because this chilly October, I find devil pods tangled among your river grasses, tough, grotesque little seed pods that look like bats or demons that will always live and thrive in you and in me. My husband, Michael, was an artist, and we met and fell in love when I was 20. And I remember coming to Cambridge, we weren't here, and going into the Harvard bookstore and finding these two books, which were the perfect presents for him. Mount Fuji, Hokusai in Hiroshige, My first presents to you, 2 linen-bound books that closed with looped ribbons and faux ivory clasps. Decades later, we gaped at Mount Fuji from a window of Japan Air and gasped together in Narita, a park so immaculate, white rocks gleamed graphic in a river of gravel. Later still, you'd move between the floating worlds of ukiyo-e woodcuts and Chinese landscapes whose surfaces entered you as if it had been fated. A draftsman's draftsman, Hokusai at 70, thought he'd begun to grasp the structures of birds and beasts, insects and fields, of the way plants grow, hoped that by 90, he'd have penetrated to their essential nature, and more, by 100, I will have reached the stage where every dot, every mark I make will be alive. You always loved that resolve, you'd repeat joyfully, Hokusai's utterance of faith in work's possibilities, its reward, that at 130, he'd perhaps have learned to draw. In Edo then, his beloved Fuji was seen as the true source of immortality, as for him it was to be. Will you always give me such spectacular gifts, you asked me that day when we were 20. Blue work shirt. I go into our bedroom closet with its one blue work shirt, the cuffs frayed, the paint stains a loopy non-narrative of color, of spirit. Now that you are bodiless and my body is no longer the body you knew, it's good to be reminded every morning of the great mess, the brio of art making. On the floor, the splattered clogs you called your Pollock shoes. At Land's End, and that's the title poem of my book. At Land's End. This garden, this is set in Provincetown, where I live part of the year and have for many years. And the Stanley I refer to is Stanley Kunitz, who was famously, at least in Provincetown, a great gardener, and he gardened until he was 100. At Land's End, this garden, its descendants, that's my garden. This garden, its descendants of Stanley's anemones, flowing, pearlescent, like the nacre of shells, their offspring mine now in my yard, fragile beside the orange blare of Dugan's trumpet vine. My almanac of inheritances swanning around my own bee balm and butterfly bush, monarchs and black swallowtails fluttering. A sunflower bowing its great human head toward the sun. The garden's heart, the lilies, its consoling perfumes, the richesse of memory. What would they say today, I wonder, our old ones? Stanley, ancient and clear-eyed, ready to jump into action, and Dugan, irascible, of furious activism far in his past, removed really past caring about much, yet somehow bracing, abrasive. There, our century long over, and today's news preposterous, still somehow unthinkable, a savage clown at the helm, breaking the toys of the circus he never liked anyway. Every treasure, every human pact, tossed aside as if they were created to be broken. Playthings of the world, mortal, uprooted. Oh, Stanley, tending your cultivated dune under the sun of justice, wiry, undefeated, feeding your annual seedlings. One late afternoon long ago, a little too early for martinis, you lay down your clippers on warm flagstone by a withering clump of weeds. Gail, you said, grabbing my wrist, urgent, what are we going to do about Bosnia? Where did it come from? Where does it go, that sense of agency? You so ready to drop your tools, compost the cuttings, compost your newspapers for the garden's future, the Times, the Globe, as if here at Land's End, here on the coast, urgent, together we'd have energies to do battle forever, as if we could rescue the guttering world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gail. That was wonderful. And next we have Enzo Silon Surin, who's a Haitian-born poet, educator, publisher, and social advocate, and is the author of When My Body Was a Clenched Fist from Black Lawrence Press in 2020, just out. And the chapbook's A Letter of Resignation, an American libretto, and Higher Ground. He is a Penn New England celebrated new voice and poet, a recipient of a Brother Thomas Fellowship from the Boston Foundation, and a Denis Diderot grant recipient as artist in resident at Chateau d'Auria in France. Surin's work gives voice to experiences that take place in what he calls broken spaces. He currently lives in Boston, Massachusetts, where he is a professor of English at Bunker Hill Community College and founding editor and publisher at Central Square Press. Welcome, Enzo.
Thank you so much for having me tonight, both Mark and Jonathan, and what a great set of readers. It's wonderful to sit at a reading and feel like you're a fan of everyone that's read, so much so that you start to embody a lot of the poems. So I'm going to try my best to transition from the space that's been created to transition into, my book, When My Body Was a Clenched Fist. I'll be reading 5 poems tonight, and each poem represents a digit as part of a fist. I often said if you read any 5 poems in the book, you will most likely have some sense of connection with them, that they all represent a fist. And I wanted to start off with one of the epigraphs in there from the book Trauma and Memory by Peter Levine, Dr. Peter Levine. And at some point I wanted to really frame the essence of the poems in the book in terms of what it means to have the body as a clenched fist. He writes in the book, in the case of acute trauma, there are hardwired emergency responses that call upon our basic survival instincts in the face of a threat. These fix action patterns, including bracing, contracting, retracting, fighting. The first poem is a poem titled Pathology of a Clenched Fist, and it really dives into how the body begins its transformation as a clenched fist, but also what it means once it becomes a clenched fist. Pathology of a clenched fist. Total recall. A fist is a palm's flight. Is thrifting through the chapters of a cold hurt. Is trying to bring into focus your obit. Is fright contained in the hue of an eye, is a ruse for oozing a crocked mouth, is for wielding class hordes like a mallet, is kowtow of the street, is rising from that, is maybe another qualm's recourse, is trying to get through an Aubon block of uppercuts, soaring near at hand to the incuse at the center of the ear, is witnessing the destruction of the universe with both hands over one's mouth, trying to conceal the blare of one's own ruin. These poems chronicle the experiences of young Black men like myself who grew up in Queens, Jamaica, Queens, mid-'80s to, you can say mid-'90s, really, and grew up at a time where we transitioned from the crack epidemic and police brutality and so forth to a stage of social violence that was not necessarily chronicled in the way that it should have been, and it didn't really showcase what was happening to these young men. And so we're sort of grouped together. And so pathology is really try to talk about the essence of what it's like walking through the block. Now, the next poem is the title poem to the in the of the book, "My Body as a Clenched Fist," and it chronicles an experience that it's really at the heart of this collection, but it's also at the heart of my experience in growing up in Queens, New York, and it's something that it was, I think, one of the last poems to be written because it was the toughest poem to write, simply because the experiences of this particular poem weren't easy to maneuver through. I had to recall all those different incidents that happened, and so it's a poem that's in 5 parts. Again, five, one for each digit, and but I'm only going to read two because I want to introduce you to why this book was really titled "When My Body Was a Clenched Fist." And so I'm going to be reading "My Body as a Clenched Fist." One, affliction. It was a gust, no, it was a burst of air that brought the coil to my hand time and again. And no matter what I did to flex it, it didn't budge, and almost always brought me back to Leon walking beside me. Then in once felt motion not there except for the treads of his shoes making its way down the street he didn't know was a one way, the wrong way. When he double backed, it was clear that something cannibalized the way home. I vetted the treetops for a place to perch, a vantage point beyond the crowd that had gathered to watch the fight, but there was no fight. It was all one-sided. 7, strike that. 10, strike that. 18, strike that. 20 pair of fists and Timberland boots bear down into the boy, and the only sight of finding him was his body balling up like a fist to brace the rush of even more fists. What could I do? What could I have done? They had begun to also cannibalize passers-by and onlookers. I did what was customary, collected faces, for the diurnal course when there'd be another way to put fear and the cheers into a vista that would involve more fist. That day never came. And when the fury this strong begins to court a young fist, when anger's calibrated with fondness for rancor, there's only one end. To fight monsters, you must yourself become a monster. 2. Aftermath. There was no sign it ever took place, no dents in the universe, no visible wounds for where the paratroopers landed their blows, no traces of Leon, no parallel bruise in your ribs or spine, just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sun. No physical wreckage, shards of bones, no raging fire or smoldering carcass, just echo in your bones and veins, in the fists you packed for the day, just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sun. No shortcuts, same streets, same trees, and you staring at yourself like the body's purpose was to harbor this universe of cavity, wide enough to muse. Maybe there was still a way, so certain there was still a way to walk away or undo what was done, but with no body, no witnesses, no one to talk to, no Leon back at school, no sign the universe was ever disturbed except in your bones and in the loaded fist you carried in your pocket. You sat in class, reviewed homework like you always did, later at recess, in that odd, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sun, whispering to the ball in your hand, shot taker and rebounder. Because even at 13, you already knew that sometimes teeth are a gateway to the city of one's understanding, and other times they are a gate for what ails, and with no credible witness to corroborate, other than your own reflections in storefront windows, the ceaseless parading of two bodies, a balancing double-barrel pair of fists, you settled into the glaring aftermath, alone, glazed in that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sun. I often mention that this particular poem was inspired by my love of watching the X-Men and other such, you can say cartoons or really comic book characters in the sense of, mutations and how they happen. And trauma actually becomes a mutation because they can actually show physical changes in one's brain as a result of trauma. And it's one of those things that you can unlearn certain things and you can cope, but there's actually a physical change as well that happens. And they show that sometimes the stress that's experienced as a result of trauma is also irreversible. And so that particular poem was talking about the first two stages, really. The original affliction, you can call it the spider bite in the sense. And then what happens that following day when you catch the glimpse of yourself in a storefront window, and then you realize that the world has moved on because the world looks exactly the same as it did the day before, except for you, and also except in your own body. And so I wanted to chronicle that because that particular incident was a friend of mine who was jumped by 20 or so individuals, and 1 second he was next to me, and the next second he was running for his life. And so a lot of times I went back and forth wondering if the incident actually happened. And then when I went back, I said, oh, you could have done something. And then every time I revisited the incident, it was clear that that it was going to happen no matter what. The next poem is a poem titled Corners. There's actually two poems titled Corners in the book. And I do that with a few of the poems because the experiences may be different, but they share some similarities. And so this poem is titled Corners. On West Bryn Mawr and Broadway, someone calls your name. An ugly strut commends his legs. Your own imagines water, buckles, sudden night crawler behind a stretched row of parked cars. You grow neck first without a face under the shield of broken street lamps. Hearts galumphing thump, thump, thump. You hear your name again, rougher, unlike a call from someone next door or that of a friend freelancing a stopover. Gargoyle in you gargling. Will you breach the quiet, boast your crew? If only there was another way to make the nights glow. How long will you lie there pretending to swim? Steady your breath. Minutes from now, a sharp pop will render another you hospital bound. Unfinished, block to block, a fire back, sirens declaring your whereabouts all evening. Damnified field theory. Don't paint yourself into a corner would imply one has a choice. A say in the selection. The brush, paint, and in the room. Corners to edge one's body's sharp elbows and knees into. A choice is not a choice if one does not have a say in the options. If we did, we would be gods. But no matter, ardent vow or ache for calling one another God, we were not. What we were taught, it was wrong. I recall playmates who made a corner their epistle and grappled with knowledge of survival, not being in the strength of an arm or in the thickness of clothes, but in how often one succumbed to the ruse of believing heaven was too far up and out of reach, and that one did not deserve it. We were taught all corners were bad places where idle things collected dust, yet New York City was filled with many such rooms. Could it be our surmise was planned? And choices we made, not choices, but decisions. And selections made were a consequence of not being ones to father options. A room with such corners isn't a city, isn't a choice, when all signs point to hell, just a few blocks away in every direction. And that poem was really written for the young folks who grapple with a number of these incidents, and folks say, well, they could have made different choices. And I always compare that to going up to a buffet. You think you're making a choice, but you really are making a decision because the choices were already selected for you. They're laid out. And so, I mean, unless you know the person behind the count, the manager or something, they can bring something out, but it's really a choice. You're choosing what's there. So it's really a decision because they already chose for you. And so a lot of these kids, and even myself growing up in Haiti, we moved to Queens, New York, thinking that it would be a better situation, and leaving, a coup that was happening in Haiti at the time. And, we moved to one of the toughest neighborhoods in Queens. And at the time, the war on drugs, which we find out was really a war on people on drugs, which meant that if you were in that neighborhood, you could fall victim to anything that was happening there, including how the police decided to administer their crime fighting tactics. So I wanted to read that particular poem because I wanted to pay homage to all those who are stuck really on these corners. And New York City still is that way in many different places, but there are other cities as well where folks are trapped in these particular corners. The next poem I want to read, and I was trying to figure out whether or not I wanted to read this particular piece, but I realized that it actually does fit with a number of things that have been going on recently. And so it's a poem titled Up Against the Wall, 94. And it chronicles one of my many encounters with the NYPD. And so when I talk about my body being a clenched fist, it wasn't just necessarily because of social violence as a result of, these other kids on the block, but it was also at the hands of the police. Up Against the Wall, 94. Years gone by and don't give them a reason is all that you can say. Still, words don't come easy. When the interrogation lasts longer than the actual minute it should take for hands to make their way around and down your chest. When the weight of both penis and pistol pushed against your back distracts you from the other pair of hands between your thighs and hot breath so close you feel moisture dewing on your cheek, and can make out what they both had for lunch and the tang of age urine and sweat on the wall. When you can't see but feel eyes clocking your arraignment, and the city behind you feels like a gone world and your weeping becomes a dreary lake in a valley of pimples. When you know looking like someone who fits the description is another way of saying they can do this and there is nothing you can do about it. And when an engram of an apology fails to greet you after, not the first, nor the second time, nor the third, you know the person who fits the description will always be you. So I'm going to read two more poems, and the last one is a very short one. 'Cause I want to end on a high note, and also as to why I wrote this particular collection of poems. But this next poem is a poem titled "In a Fisted Universe," and it really also chronicles what happens when folks are forced to be on top of each other, and how almost there was an order to the chaos that was happening, and that it wasn't as crazy as folks thought. Like there was a method and purpose behind it. So, just looking for the particular page of this poem. Give me a second. And one of the things that this really chronicles is also what happens with trauma later on in life, and how sometimes you don't necessarily think you were afflicted by something, and then you hear a noise. It's a sound or a smell, and it takes you right back to the original incident. In a Fisted Universe. Would have thought we were trained for the shots we took. Fists tossed into the blind bend of neck and shoulder, where truth held more misses than hits, most of which was more show than blow. Sometimes, as if on cue, a spark brought open in the crowd, amidst drawl and grimace, and the withdrawn drew their card into the dark matter of an ever after. Triumph or defeat, no one ever cried, as if the body only attended to the tear and break and not to tears. Most of these bouts, staged in empty school lots, flits flaring their stellar remnants, begot not one bona fide winner. Fight within as bitter as any in the ring. And the one thing that always survived were lies told about whose fists were hindmost, not how easily hearts on the guard went into flip mode over a fresh pair of white sneakers, and how some were eager to pledge homage to a posse, Didn't matter the cause of if one really believed in the push of fists over bodies, one day you'd be next. And some years from this moment, the sound of something breaking or some poor boy's plea will awaken lessons learned in science class about sound travel in space, myths of how one can witness the destruction of the world without hearing a single sound, how one can wail, 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 and no one would be able to hear it. But you know this to be claptrap in space or backlot. You can always hear the blare of your own ruin. And this is the last poem. It's a poem titled On Sunday Autumn Afternoons in Jamaica, Queens. And it really highlights an experience that happened every fall. We played football on Sunday afternoons. And by we, I meant all of these, kids that at random sometimes were pushed against each other for whatever reason. Um, Whatever beef anyone had, any problems that they had, it was squashed, and everyone showed up for a game of football. And it was a beautiful moment that I wanted to chronicle because one of the things I wanted to showcase and highlight was these were still kids, and they're still kids. No matter what situation they found themselves in, they were still children, and we showed that on Sunday afternoons. And so it's a poem titled, again, On Sunday Autumn Afternoons in Jamaica, Queens. We trusted our bodies, cutting into the fat, bold air, in hand-me-down layers, pigskin against our ribs like a Hughes-weighted dream. No pads, no helmets for the journey of grabs and leaps. We toiled until the field faded, and alone and out of breath, we talked and laughed, waited, the accumulation of out and gone days. Some of the things we never said, as if this would carry into real life. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Enzo. And it did carry on into real life. Thank you so much again, all of you, Steven Cramer, Joyce Pessaroff, Gail Mazer, and Enzo Silon Surin, for those wonderful readings. And just a brief announcement. Next week we have Pierre Joris and his wife, Nicole Parafit. So that should be quite an interesting show. Do tune in at that time, of course. And now, for the open mic part of the show, I'd like to invite Kevin Gallagher to read a poem.
Thanks, Mark. Great reading by all these folks. I'm actually not going to read a poem by myself today, of my own today. I will read it by myself. I'm going to read a poem by the poet Kenneth Rexroth, who's over here over my right shoulder, reading from his living room when he used to do the KPFA radio show in San Francisco. I just found his first book, In What Hour, 1940. And so I'm going to read a poem called The Motto on the Sundial. It is September, and the rye corn rattles dry in the fields. It is dawn. The spider webs are white in the tracks of cattle. The holes where they have torn up the grass roots, they are dry, sticky, no dew is on them. The morning comes. It is hot with the first dawn and windless. The flowery dust in the cowpath curls over no higher than my boot and then settles into my crumbling footprints. The torn crows settle again into the dead elm, saying little. McGregor, Iowa. I stand on the bluff, looking out over the river, the water oozing past and the smell coming up from it, up from the scabby flat where the pigs stumble. In Wisconsin, smoke blooms over the forest, plumed at first and then flattening slowly. I have seen the fog over the lotus buds, white, curded, and thick to the bluff's edge, the sun yellow over Wisconsin and the sky blue, the air wet and jewelweed in the ravine, wet and the colored sandstone like wet sugar. It is later than you think. Fires have gone over our forests. The grasshopper screamed in our corn. Hunger over young men and fear everywhere. Fires have gone over the brains of our young girls. The smell of gas has ascended from the streets, bloomed from cartridges, spread from wall to wall, bloomed on the highways and seeped into the corn. It is later than you think. There is a voice preparing to speak. There are whisperings now, and murmuring, and noises made with the teeth. This voice will grow louder and learn a language. They shall sit trembling while its will is made known. In gongs struck, bonfires, and shadows on sundials. Once it is spoken, it shall never be silenced. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Kevin. And next we have Kayla Rodney. Is Kayla Rodney in the house? Yes, I believe she is. Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
How are you all doing tonight?
We're great. How about you?
I'm okay, a little tired, but I'm here. I am here.
Well, you look vibrant anyway.
Thank you. I'm just going to read one piece today, something that was recently published in Heartbeat Hyper Review and has recently become one of my favorite poems. Some of you may have heard it before. If not, you're in for what I believe is a treat. So I'm just going to jump on into it and hopefully you enjoy it. So this poem is called Ode to Joy. Over 200 years ago, Black feet in shackles shuffled to shores they were unsure of. The jingle of chains, a precursor to the jingle of change and coin purses used to purchase us. But still we sang into blue skies and turned the shuffle into a two-step, turned that two-step into a salsa. We are a people of transmutation. We come from a history of radical joy. When whips cracked overhead while blistered hands reached into cotton bulbs, staining them with the first red dye of blood, we sang, there is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There's a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. The overseers didn't know how we were gonna overcome, but we were already a choir for freedom. They asked us to sing those songs, but they didn't know we were singing revolution. When was the last time you smiled? I spoke to Joy today. She rode in with her top down. She smelled like a good night. She looked like she'd been eating well. And I had to say, a good goddamn bitch, where have you been? She said, I've been planting seeds in the turned soil of my soul. I've been weeding the garden of my spirit. I've been tending to the honeypot and coming in the morning. I've been living in today with my foot in tomorrow. I've been inhaling deeply while remembering those who can't breathe. I've been dancing in the streets while the bullet casings turn to rust around my feet. I've decided to live despite the fact they believe it impossible. Do what you need to do with this. Then she drove off in her drop top like a lit ass bitch, and all there was left to do was write this ode to joy. And I dedicate this poem to my cousin Ashley. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Kayla. And next we have Brian Franco. Is Brian Franco in the house?
I don't see that name.
Okay, so then we'll move on to Bob Heyman. Bob, I think I saw Bob earlier.
Yeah. Okay. Good reading as always. Information. Each new language began with a mistake, a word misheard or misspelled, a phrase that pointed in the wrong direction, a speaker who became the spoken about, a color that became too deep to climb out of, a structure that was too parallel to ever be counted. an animal that was mistaken for a pronoun, a woman whose location could not be described. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Wonderful. Well, thank everybody. Thank you all for joining us here tonight at this wonderful reading featuring Steven Cramer, Joyce Pessaroff, Gail Mazer, and Enzo Silon Surin. Next week, as I had mentioned, we have Pierre Joris and his wife. Should be quite a show. I think they'll be doing a bit of translation, a bit of cabaret, and a bit of tap dancing. What do you think, Jonathan?
Sounds about right.
So please do join us. Everyone stay well. Thank God Joe and Kamala are now there. It's all going to be okay. Don't worry. Love you guys. Poetry and love.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.